Some tough subjects are discussed in this episode, and if you're affected by any of this, there are some organisations listed in our show notes who can help. If you're watching this on a Content Hub laptop, visit the health and wellbeing link at the top of your screen for more information on mental health support, or speak to a listener. What is one thing that you only know if you've been to prison?
How canteen works.
Good one.
Shout, that's a good shout. How canteen works. When you say canteen, people are like, what?
Yeah.
But yeah, the other thing I'll say is last call showers.
That's peak, isn't it?
Only if you've been to prison, you know. Hello and welcome back to Life After Prison with Zach and Jules. Joining us today in the studio is a very special guest. He is the CEO and founder of the Paradigm Project, Joel. How you doing, Joel?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
All good, man.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. So we're going to go straight in, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the Paradigm Project. What do you do and what are your aims?
Yeah, so Paradigm Project was founded in 2020 and it was in response to seeing a lack of preventative approaches to tackling complex youth issues. So before founding it, the organisation, I had some experiences working in frontline youth services. So I did some work in prisons, delivering projects in schools, working a lot around knife crime. And I think one of the roles that really impacted me it was only for a short period of time, was working in a hospital directly with the victims of gun and knife crime within the trauma unit. And our role then was to work with the young people and help assess the risk before they go back into the community. And I think kind of seeing that crisis end of the problem and seeing the questions that were being asked by the professionals, like, why are the people so young? Like every week was a new batch of 15 people, you know, and I think, and these were, some of them were not the people that make the statistics. These were kids that were literally unplugging themselves, coming out of theatre and going back into the community, you know. And I think for me, I became frustrated at how reactive everything seemed. So yeah, I really wanted to set up something that spoke to more upstream solutions. So that's what Paradigm Project does. Our kind of tagline is championing equity in education. And where that has landed us over the last 4 years is focusing at the transition from primary to secondary school, particularly in understanding risk and vulnerability, and how can we support and empower children at that early stage instead of waiting for them to get all these labels attached to them.
Yeah, waiting for the problems to occur.
Exactly.
So what's given you the motivation then and the determination to set this up and to serve others?
Yeah, I think the service part is a really key part of it. I think the root of what I'm doing started in prison. I did my mentoring qualification. And I will admit, for purely selfish reasons, because I have my level 3 personal trainer in another lifetime. That's what I used to do. And I found out that if I did my mentoring qualification, I could mentor the people doing level 2 fitness instructor. So I was like, okay, that means I get to be in the gym all day, every day. That's what I want to do.
That's called being proactive, though.
Yeah.
And I mean, selfish in a great way. We've got to be selfish to keep our brains stimulated in there.
I guess. But I mean, what it led to was not what I was looking at initially. So before I could go and mentor in the gym department, they said I have to mentor in maths and English.
Okay.
So I did that, and it really opened my eyes because, you know, I was helping people do like basic writing sentences, and these weren't stupid people, or do you know what I mean? They were people that were, you know, had a lot about them, were successful in their own rights and in their own ways, but hadn't had the same opportunities that I had. And I think that's what made me aware for the first time of the privileges that I had. And I think privilege is a word that makes people uncomfortable. Like in my space, in the work that I do, often people talk about white privilege and you literally can see everybody like tense up in the room. Yeah. But I think a colleague of mine, she always frames privilege as the opposite to oppression. Like a really simple way to understand it for me is like, if I'm walking at home late at night, I don't have to be looking over my shoulder or have a key between my fingers because I'm worried about who might come. So in that sense, I'm privileged as a man. Right. Do you know what I mean? So we don't recognize our privileges a lot of time. And I think privilege is the opposite to oppression, you know? So for me, the things I had taken for granted, like completing my compulsory education, the fact that I'd gone on to further education, had employment history, all of these things were things that I'd completely taken for granted because they were the norm around me, but they weren't the common experiences of the people that I was sharing that prison experience with.
How did you feel realizing that you were privileged from being in like such a place that is not quite privileged?
Yeah, I think privilege shouldn't make you feel uncomfortable. I think it's important to name and accept the places in what you're privileged, because then you can take action from that point. And I think for me, it gave me a deep sense of purpose. Like prior to prison, my career was working as a bodyguard. So I was a close protection officer for a high net worth family. And to all intents and purposes, at my age, I was earning good money. I didn't foresee myself doing anything else. And I think the things that motivated me, like most people, were material, you know, and even though there were some deeper parts of my character, I think the thing that I was really pursuing and was latched onto was, okay, I'm making money here, you know, I had access and was experiencing a different level of life working for somebody with that level of wealth. But kind of, I think I describe prison as like the great leveler, because no matter who you are, what part of society you're from, it strips you of all the things that you identify in and you think that are important. Obviously, it's a microism of society and pecking orders and whatever, they work themselves out in prison. But at that moment when you walk through the door, it strips you back and everyone's
on the same level.
Yeah, exactly. So I think for me, when I started doing the mentoring, I experienced like a sense of purpose and, you know, that I'd not experienced before. So for me, I was like, okay, this is like the service part, you know, serving others. I feel like true purpose is always going to be connected in some way to service to others, you know? So yeah, I think that's where Paradigm Project was. The ideas of what I'm doing now were born in that prison cell, essentially.
I love that. So just to like extract a little bit more, what were the kind of things that you noticed around that time when you discovered that, you know, I've got a certain privilege, when certain people are going through other things, you know, I want to serve others? What were the kind of things that you noticed during that time?
Yes, specifically straight away when I came into prison, I stuck out like a sore thumb because I didn't know what to do. Everyone else, most people around me, in fact, nearly all of the people around me had been to prison before. You know, even from going from court to the prison, I was the last one to get on the bus. And then we get out and everyone's put in that holding cell and everyone's like people are asking me, what you got? Did you bring anything in? And do you know what I mean? And I'm just like, wow, like I really don't know. Do you know what I mean? I
don't know what's the crack, basically.
What's going on here. Yeah. So I think because of that, you know, like there were some obvious reasons why I stuck out, you know, and then those deeper reasons, like some of the things like education, even the fact like I had supportive friends and family. Like I was in prison in Leeds, that's where my offence was and where I got sentenced. And I would have more visits and letters than most people that were local in Leeds. Yeah. Wow. And I think, you know, again, I thought it was normal to have a supportive network and people that are around you that are, especially in that type of, you know, what can be a desperate situation. You know, if people aren't going to support you when you're in prison, then they're not going to support you in your good time. So for me, like even those relationships I had taken for granted. Like even when I got sentenced, I came up to Leeds with a whole batch of people. And you know, like I remember on the day that I got sentenced, it was right at the end of the day. Okay. And my barrister said to me, we're not going to get seen today. And I said, you know what? I can't make my family and friends come up again, wait for another month or what have you. And he said, I would advise against you being the last person of the day. Like, because you're then playing with what mood the judge is in. And I said, I really felt like I was on bail for a long time and I felt like I was ready. Like I just wanted being in this purgatory place, this middle ground, like I just wanted to go, you know? So yeah, like I had all those people support me, even like the character references I had in my case. Those are all things, the people that were behind me and understood me were things that I took for granted. So they became more obvious when I was in this situation.
I forget, like even when I felt like that when I first got into prison, like I just, it was all so new to me, but you forget that that's a kind of privilege that you don't really put in like a privileged section. Do you know what I mean? You obviously have thought about this a lot, which is, well, yeah, it's massive credit, just understanding how you are in this world as well. What was life like for you before you went to prison?
Yeah, I think for me, this ties into like some of the deeper parts of who I am. But I think, so I went to prison for GBH and I got a very lenient sentence, actually. I think the judge took into consideration character references, the fact that it was my first offence. But I think underneath, there had always been a lot of chaos and things that were not dealt with in prison. And I think like the violent offence is why I went to prison, but there's always deeper reasons behind why people, like, it's like if somebody is caught for burglary, it's rarely just because they did it for the kicks of it. There was a deeper reason or something underneath why they were doing what they were doing. So for me, like I on the surface, everything looked good. You know, I was married. I had this really good job, you know, and there was kind of a novelty factor tied to the job that I was doing. But underneath, there was a lot of chaos. I think if you put 20 people in the room, each part of them would have a piece of the puzzle to say who I am. But no one of those people, even the people who were closest to me, would have been able to tell you the whole picture.
Wow.
So how long did you actually get in prison?
So I got 20 months, which for GBH obviously is a very lenient sentence. My barrister on the day was telling me to expect between 5 to 9 years. So.
I was going to say, isn't it six to 12? I was facing 6 to 12 years.
Yeah.
So I didn't think they would. Okay, well.
Depends on what section.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Section
what, like
18, section 20, section 18.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, your life, you said what you did for work and like all these things you had around you. What did you see this coming then? Was this something that, you know, you ever prepared for?
Yeah. Do you know what? If it wasn't that, it would have been something. The wheels would have come off at some point. So just to give a bit of context. So, and this is all stuff like I've unpacked post prison. But so
well done.
Yeah, thank you.
That's
the
hard to do.
Work.
Yeah,
for sure. So I'm going to give this context. It will make sense.
Go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
So I was sexually abused as a child. Yeah. And like when I was the ages of 4 and 5, and I came from a very strict religious house. Like my dad was involved in leadership within the church. So I was like, I guess, sexualized as a child and sexually active throughout the whole of primary school. But there was, I think, it was secrecy, there was shame because of the environment that I was from. So it was all that was internalized. And then when I went to secondary school, I think 2 things happened. It's like the hypersexualization of like black and mixed race men in the community, which is normal, you know, like in media, in music, what have you. So all of a sudden I was like the mixed race guy, the tall mixed race guy. And then the other part of that was like, I guess, that version of masculinity that celebrates that whole girl thing. Yeah. So for me, the thing that was always hidden and suppressed now was celebrated.
Okay.
But then because it became more overt, more open, I guess the internal stuff and the deeper stuff I never dealt with. And I think subconsciously, and these are reflections and things that I only have understood, you know, by going through a lot of therapy and unpacking and working through. But, you know, like, I think my whole identity actually became around, you know, this character, to the point I didn't actually know who I was outside of this. So even like my offense, I went to prison for violence, but I'd never had an issue with violence before. And to me, the truth of the matter is that I was married and I was out and I got into a confrontation with somebody and I was with another girl. So to me, I didn't go into prison because of violence. I went into prison because of issues and behavior patterns that had caused problems my whole life.
Hey.
And I think, so for me, I think addressing those things only happened, like even acknowledging the fact that I suffered from abuse and understanding how that impacted me, that only came after prison, and not even immediately after prison. I think with it took time for me to even be ready to even articulate those things and for those words to come out of my mouth. So I think often we see just the surface issue. And I think that's was common of the people that I was around in prison. When you because of that shared experience, I guess that shared trauma or whatever you're going through with the people that are in prison, you form those connections really quickly, don't you? Yes. You form those bonds really quickly.
It's trauma bonding, right?
Exactly, yeah. And you talk to people and you realize most people that are in prison, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of trauma underneath it, So I feel like even being able to articulate it and have the chance to unpack it that's a privilege.
Facts.
I think that's why we get to see people in prison as real people, what we try and talk about all the time, because we actually understand about their life and maybe where they come from and why they are there and what they're going through. Because we do talk. You did tell us before this pod that you did lose, your wife and your house, and you was kind of at this like rock bottom stage. When was that? At what point were you going through that?
Yeah. So I talked to my sister. I got a younger sister. She's 3 years younger than me, and we're really close. And she's one of those people that just checks me all the time. She can talk to me and say things to me that most people can't.
Put you back in your place.
Put me back in my place, exactly. And she said to me, she used the phrase "when chaos leads," and I think because of the undealt things within my life, there was always like these high highs and then these low lows. Like it was normal for me to have these big moments. Like even the job I was doing and then the incident around prison, that wasn't like out of character for me to have these huge things.
Okay.
You know? So my response to chaos was always more chaos. Like even when the incident happened, I dipped out. Like I flew to Spain and I was like, I'm not on this. Do you know what I mean? And even that was like such a cowardly and selfish decision that hurt and damaged the people that were around me. So I think like even in terms of my partner, like when I was inside, writing was something that I found extremely therapeutic. Like that's still something that is like a tool that I use. Like writing is such a pure form of communication. Like a lot of the stuff that I wrote didn't even end up going to anybody, but I was writing letters backwards and forwards to people. And I think obviously knowing the chaos that had happened before, I think when it got to the time of release, knowing that I'm going to be back in the real world with, real issues and what have you, I think for my partner, that was like a bit too much. Okay. So the relationship didn't last long after I came out. And then, so my relationship broke down maybe like 2 months after I got released. And I think true to character, my response was chaotic. Yeah, because like that was what I almost like, for me, there's a comfortability in chaos. Like sometimes when things were going well, like my therapist describes it as like the F it button, that was there's like a reaching out. Yeah, a reaching out. Yeah, self-destruct. So for me, like the darkest period of my life, like prison, the actual prison experience for me wasn't negative. I think because of my vices and because of the things that I've had issues with, this is going to sound really strange, but actually the period of time that I was in prison was actually one of the freest parts of my life that I've ever had, because my problems didn't exist and I was able to turn the lens inwards in a way that I've never done before and work on myself. Then the reality of coming back out into the real world, having to deal with real problems, trying to find, I couldn't do the job that I was previously doing. I was banned from working in a security industry.
Was that
because
forever?
10 years, I think, is the standard ban.
So there was no way you could go back to that.
Yeah. So like I was in this place of trying to find my feet again, but and I describe this part as like the purpose paradox, because in prison, through the work I'd done through mentoring and kind of some of the basic framework around Paradigm Project, I felt like I discovered my sense of purpose. But then the reality of life when I came out was like, I felt unworthy, incapable of fulfilling it. And there was all this mess still going on, like I said, my response was chaos. And so some of my behaviors then became very destructive. I pushed people away from me that cared about me and that supported me. I was in an area that was far away from that support anyway. But, I kind of was my own worst enemy in that period of time.
Listen, I'm sure that's not just you. That's a lot of us. How did you
turn all of that into a positive force of change?
I think rock bottoms, you use the phrase rock bottom. And I think in terms of what I lost, I felt like prison and after prison was rock bottom. But it wasn't, because I think the behaviors that I was involving myself in, the people that I was surrounding myself in, the relationships that I had in that 2 years after prison was all just self-destruct. And I think what was worse was because I had this sense of, I know what I should be doing for the first time, or I know what will kind of take me out of this place. But there was this internal conflict. And I ended up like really suffering with my mental health. So in 2018, I had a complete mental health breakdown, and I took an overdose. And I was like I was checked out, like I was done. Like I took like over 70 tablets. Like I was gone. I remember waking up and the first thing I felt was shame. Like I felt like I even failed at that, you know?
Wow.
And yeah, like that was rock bottom. And I think 2 weeks after that happened, I was staying at my parents' house and I hadn't spoken. I hadn't said a single word. I hadn't spoken. And the mental health team were coming in and checking on me twice a day. Then they increased it to 3 times a day. And there was this particular moment where they was having this conversation with my mum and like, you know, because I hadn't spoken, the risk was high that I would do it again in the eyes of the mental health team, like to the point where all the medication was hidden in the house. Like there were nights when my mum would be sleeping in the bed next to me, like that type of, you know, and it's weird because in traumatic incidents, you don't remember a lot of it, but I remember this conversation vividly. The mental health team was saying, if he doesn't speak, we're going to have to section him. And I was sat there and they were talking about me like I wasn't in the room, you know, because I think it's such a long period of time that I hadn't spoken. And my mom, like in her desperation, like she was saying, look, he's safe here. Like he's loved here. Nothing will happen here. And in that moment was when I was like, I think something just clicked in me. And I was like, I'm okay. I said to them, I'm okay. And I always remembered that moment as being a catalyst for saying, okay, well, I didn't die in that incident, but a part of me had to die. And now I have to start building myself from there. So that all those feelings of feeling unworthy and incapable, I think I let people in for the first time. That's when I started doing therapy. I did a residential program, which was a specialist program for people that have been sexually abused and like explored some of the ways that impacted my life. But, you know, obviously that was a dark time and a really painful time. But when I look back at my story, I think that was a pivotal moment for me.
What does it take to come back from all of that?
I think those moments, I mean, it's still a work in progress, right? Like when you've experienced those things, and that kind of deep struggles with mental health, I think it's a reference point. It's a point where you can check yourself against, you know, there's still a lot of work I need to do on myself. I think I have a conversation a lot with one of my closest friends, and we talk about self-excavation instead of self-awareness. And I think, you know, like a lot of people can be self-aware, right? They can check the mirrors and see what's going on. I think self-excavation requires a different level of work. And I think, you know, that level of work is ugly a lot of the time. It's painful. You know, the path to the things I'm trying to achieve has never been straight or plain, you know. And I think there's a lot of things that I have to keep learning. Like, so for example, my daughter, she's 4 years old now, and her being at the age that I was when I was abused was hugely triggering for me. Like there were times, like for example, finding her nursery and I had a panic attack. You know, like I really struggled, and I didn't perceive or think that would be something that happened that caught me off guard, if you like. And I think my response in the past has always been chaos, you know, and those like harmful and negative relationships. And that doesn't mean the people are negative and the people are harmful, but it's like some people would turn to a drink. For me, I find my comfort in those relationships that are maybe taking me away from the paths that I'm meant to be on. So I think, you know, I've got people around me that in times have loved me more than I've loved myself. I have wanted better for me than I've even wanted for myself. And that keeps me grounded, you know. And I also tell my people, challenge me, you know, hold me accountable. Yeah. And that's not always easy, you know, that's not always easy. And I think that's the thing, you know, like healing and progression, especially like when you've been through prison or when you've experienced trauma or difficulties in your life, like healing is I know this sounds really cheesy, but healing is not a destination. It's a journey. Yeah. Like I think, you know, you're always going to be required to look within and kind of check yourself in different ways and continue that growing. And for me, like even in the difficult times or when I get it wrong, you know, I go back to those reference points, like there might be things that I need to put in place. In terms of mental health, my therapist reframed it. I think sometimes some of the simplest concepts, when something complex is reframed in a way that just clicks with you. And my therapist says mental health and puts the word hygiene on the end. And just that word for me makes so much sense because like your physical hygiene, you know the things that you've got to do, and if it slips, you know that there's consequences, blah, 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 blah. So for me, like mental health, hygiene, like if something's gone wrong or there's parts of my life that, you know, aren't in line with where I want to go and who I want to be, then that means that something is wrong and I've got to kind of reassess those things.
So it sounds like you did a lot of work on yourself, right?
Mm.
But I just want to take you back to prison for this specific moment, this question. Like you've done a mentoring course that you've said, you've done a business course. How do you stay focused in a place like prison, and how do you stay motivated to work on yourself?
Like I said, I think for me, when I was in there, like I describe it as like, and this is not me in any way glorifying prison or the taking away from the seriousness of what it is. But for me, it was almost like personal development boot camp on steroids, because I could work on myself without the distractions of anything around me. So I was reading a lot. Like I said, I was doing a lot of healing through writing and connecting with people, mending things that, you know, have never been addressed. So for me in actual prison, like I was determined to use that time positively. Like the real challenge came afterwards, and I wish I was better prepared for how difficult it would be on the way out, or anybody could give me, like nobody gave me the heads up. Like I wish somebody let me know that that's where the real challenge was. But yeah, like I was, and again, like I'm grateful that I was able to use that time inside positively. Like self-help and all of this stuff is almost trendy now, right? But when we do that self work, we have to do it amongst the chaos of normal life, right? In prison, you exist in a bubble. So like, and I think it's what's between your two ears, you know, if you can be at peace by being alone, be at peace with your thoughts, you know, and process those things, which I had the opportunity to do, you know, like my faith was really important to me in prison. My prayer time, and that was something that I hadn't explored for myself up until that point, you know? So I think prison was in itself was actually, I said like felt free, but actually was a really therapeutic process for me.
You mentioned between the ears, yeah? So obviously you're talking about your mindset. What was your mindset like? Describe what your mindset was like.
It's going back to that rock bottom thing that you said, Jules. I think it was like, okay, I'm here, but I've had opportunities that these men around me haven't had. You know, I wasn't on the roads. I wasn't, you know, in and out of jail. So why am I here? Like, as in, I deserve to be there. I'd accepted responsibility for what I'd done that put me in prison, but like, I shouldn't have been in this situation. Something had gone wrong. So for me, there was a real determination to say, okay, I can't come out of here the same. Like, I can't not use this experience for something positive. And I think like the holistic growth, so like body, mind, spirit, I was able to focus on all of those areas. And like, I was disciplined. I was in a routine. Like before we was unlocked, like I was up, you know, I was in a I used to fall asleep when Hollyoaks was on at some point. You know what I mean? Like I was sleeping half of my sentence away, but even like just the discipline around the structures of my routine, I think even discipline that works sometimes, and like even boundaries and those things can have negative connotations. But for me, I've learned now to view boundaries and self-discipline as a form of self-love. Like that's a high form of self-love for me, you know, like those boundaries that we put in place, they're way more difficult on the outside, you know? So for me in there, I was locked in. Like people would come to visit me and like, they would leave inspired. Like, do you know what I mean? Because I felt like I was positive and bouncing off the walls. Oh. So yeah, I think I was able to use the actual time that I was in there really positively.